Extract 1. Questions 1 to 12. You hear a primary care doctor talking to a patient called Hayley Dove. For questions 1 to 12, complete the notes with a word or short phrase that you hear. You now have 30 seconds to look at the notes.
So, Mrs. Dove, I have your notes here, but it would be good to hear things from your perspective. How all this started, what treatments you've had, anything you think I should be aware of.
Well, where to begin? I should explain that I'd been suffering with endometriosis for quite a long time, ever since my son was born, actually, and he's at university now. So I was used to a certain level of discomfort. Feeling bloated a lot of the time, getting the occasional bouts of nausea and feeling quite a bit of fatigue.
Right.
Anyway, after a while, I also started to get pain in my lower back, and that gradually got worse and worse. I was working as a preschool teacher in those days and had a young family of my own. It was a tough time. In the end, I had to give up my job. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I was eventually diagnosed with cervical cancer. I was fairly lucky, I guess. It hadn't advanced too much, and I was advised to have a hysterectomy. Although I was out of action for a while, it all went relatively smoothly, and of course it also sorted out my other problems. So for a while I was relatively well. My kids were at school by this time, so I was able to start my own business, working online as a recruitment consultant. I'd put both illnesses behind me, and I was feeling very positive.
But then you started to develop other symptoms.
That's right. Those feelings of fatigue started coming back. I'd find I was exhausted after a full day of online meetings. If I did have to go anywhere and do anything, like attend the occasional conference, especially if it involved driving any distance, that would just wipe me out. So something obviously wasn't right. Anyway, I went to see the doctor, and he said that it sounded like I might have iron deficiency anemia, and he did some blood tests. But when the results came back, I was really surprised to find I actually had iron overload, and the next step was to test for hemochromatosis, and of course that came back positive. The first thing the doctor asked was whether anyone else in the family had ever had it, because it can be genetic. Anyway, I didn't know for sure because I was adopted as a baby, and I'd only just recently traced my birth mother and started to get to know her. Anyway, she was able to confirm that some cousins, whom I'd never met, had indeed got the same thing.
I see. So, have you been having treatment?
Yes, I was told that the only option was venesection. That came as a bit of a shock, and I had it every week initially. Then once a month, and I've been going every 3 months for some years now. I mean, it's fine. It hurt a bit at first, but I'm left with quite a bit of scarring on the arm where the needle goes in. But it's something I can live with. For the last few years, I've been back to my usual energetic self.
So, what brings you here today?
Well, I've started to develop some other problems, and I'd just like to have them checked out. I mean, I'm not getting any younger, so these could be completely unconnected with the blood problem. Anyway, the first thing is that I've started to get a bit of stiffness in my joints. It's particularly noticeable in my fingers, but I think it's there in my knees too. Then I also seem to be getting more thirsty than usual, and it doesn't seem to be related to how much I drink. And the other thing is that I get a bit short of breath sometimes, even when I haven't been doing anything particularly strenuous. You know, just walking the dog or washing the car, and it suddenly comes on. None of these things is a big deal, but I've just noticed the change.
Sure. I'll ask you a bit more about those symptoms in a moment, but what I'd like to do first is have a listen to your chest.